Westworld Season 4 Episode 6 has just released on HBO Max, and in this episode we got Caleb's brutal fidelity test, Bernard and grown-up Frankie repairing the weapon they found, and the overall setup for the battle we'll see at the end of this season. In this spoiler review and explained analysis, I'm going to be giving you my breakdown of Westworld Season 4 Episode 6, entitled Fidelity, alongside discussing my general thoughts towards it. But before I get into it, if you want to see more videos on Season 4 of Westworld, then don't forget to support this upload by giving it a like rating, subscribing to the channel, and turning on your notifications. Also, feel free to check me out on Twitter, Facebook, Reddit, and Instagram at Cortex Videos, which is all linked in the description below. But without further ado, let's dive into my review and explained video for Westworld Season 4 Episode 6. So in Westworld Season 4 Episode 6, the concept of fidelity is finally explored, and done so in a way that is quite straightforward for everyone to understand. What we know about this is that copies will eventually have less fidelity or faithfulness to the original because details are lost when you repeat that process. But on repeat, if you can create an accuracy to the original and have that subject not just remember but truly show that they are the same consciousness living on, then the fidelity test can be successful. William tried to do this to James Delos back in Season 2 and failed, and we know that someone is doing the same to William in the distant future thanks to the Season 2 post-credit scene. But as I questioned in my predictions video for this episode last week, why would Hale bother to do this to Caleb? What is her true goal in determining if this Caleb host is accurate to its human version? Well, it becomes very straightforward and clear that she's been testing the host versions of Caleb for fidelity so that she can discover a secret he knows about. And all while this goes on, the other narrative thread of this episode also relates to that fidelity title, because we have humans being checked over whether they themselves are faithful or not. There's a mole in the resistance camp, and Caleb's grown-up daughter Frankie is essentially checking them for fidelity. If you ask me, it's quite the ingenious setup that only makes the rest of the season ahead that much more intriguing. So let's dive into both narrative threads and talk about exactly what happened in this incredible episode of Westworld. Starting with Caleb's daughter, the episode begins with a flashback scene where we get a young Frankie and Caleb's wife, Yawade, helping humans that haven't already been controlled by Halores. Essentially, the outliers that can't be controlled by the fly infection program that we've seen in previous installments. And while in this flashback they are in the heart of the city, everyone around them appears to be frozen, while those creepy drone hosts start to inspect a potential breach in this control. That breach is Frankie, her mother, and a young Jay, which I predicted would be the case in my trailer breakdown video last week. They seem to escape this inspection until a fly lands on one of the Resistance members' faces. He then blinks, and this alerts the drone host that just inspected him. However, they manage to escape this situation, and all of them travel away to an abandoned house to hide with some others. Jay is introduced to the rest of the people who will eventually form the Resistance we know in the present day, and while visibly stressed and in grief over his brother, young Frankie shows him her radio, in which she tells him about the messages she sends to her deceased father. Jay says that she's wasting her time and her father is dead, but because we know that grown-up Frankie is still looking for him years later, it makes this a bigger bigger emotional hook for what we see unfold by the end with Hale's fidelity test. And this is instantly suggested by the cut that is made across time to a now grown-up Frankie turning the dial on her vehicle's radio, with Bernard present and Maeve's body in the back seat. And as we find out, they are going somewhere that Bernard's visions in the Sublime suggested that we would be going to. That somewhere is the abandoned Golden Age Park, which is now completely empty in the desert and covered in even more sand. Bernard needs the tools here to fix Maeve, and he knows that this abandoned park will have what he needs. He also knows that things are about to get hairy with the people he's trying to help, and we begin to see that grown-up Frankie is questioning his every move. In response to questions, he tells her about how he used to work at Westworld, and that the parks had a lot of secrets that the humans didn't know about. When she accuses him of giving Hale the tools to strangle humanity, he says, "This park shares an architect with Westworld. Delos was known for keeping its employees in the dark as much as the guests." He then proceeds to show her how the mirrors in the Golden Age Park were used to gather data, just like how the hats were used in the original Westworld. And this is again another reference to the through the looking glass metaphors we've had in many seasons. Essentially, in order for Dolores to control humans, she needed to understand how, and spent many years fine-tuning her control program, and this park was essentially, as many of us predicted, the test location for what she would do in the real world and what we've seen in New York City. But coming back to Bernard and his attempts to stay on the right path, he begins to rebuild Maeve using his collected tools, and we soon learn that he has to transfer her memory from a damaged pearl into the pearl of another host that they found in the facilities. And during the transfer, Frankie throws even more questions his way, making it clear to us that she just wants to know what happened to her father. Before she can get those answers, the Resistance arrive at the park following their rescue of an outlier during last week's episode. With Bernard alerted to this, he hides the pearls being used to transfer Maeve's memory inside of an old piano, hoping that Frankie may come around and understand what she has to do later on. He blows dust off the lid of the piano and then continues to patch up Maeve, with Frankie being reminded of what happened to her mother. She tells Bernard that her mother got ill and needed the same kind of attention. So maybe Bernard did something identical to what happened with Frankie's mother, and it's a way of making them stay on the correct path. And maybe it was that blow of dust that triggered this reaction. We don't currently know because we haven't seen the outcome with her mother, but it's something interesting to keep in mind if we eventually do get the answers on that. What we do learn though is that Frankie understands that Bernard knows Maeve, that she has also seen her before when she was younger, and that she remembers that Maeve was with her father when he never returned. So a long catch up is needed between our favourite host and Caleb's daughter, but first they have to avoid a trap that Hale has put in place for them. Just something to quickly also note about that conversation between Bernard and Frankie is that Bernard also specifically mentions that Dolores has some sort of fake reality she's constructed. And of course, this instantly makes us think about Christina and what could be happening there. I've predicted in previous videos that Christina is in some sort of simulation, and with Bernard hinting that there's a simulation that is generating narratives for the controlled subjects in the real world, then this might be what we are seeing. It'll be interesting to see how that transpires, but with him mentioning this, it must be important, and I think we will be getting our answers on this next time we see Christina. So with Bernard hiding Maeve's pearl and Frankie still questioning what he's truly aiming to achieve here, this is where the rest of the Resistance enter the room, and grown-up Jay seems anxious about a potential mole in their group. Frankie, who is still not fully convinced by Bernard, shoots him, revealing to them all that he's a host. And once they take Bernard and Stubbs hostage and place them in a nearby room, it gives Bernard the time to warn Frankie about the mole being one of the members of the resistance in an attempt to try and convince her that it isn't him who is the mole. On the lookout for this mole, Frankie first questions her girlfriend, and with her not quite understanding what's truly going on, she locks her in a room away from everything, making her question all of her allies even more. And once she gets the room alone with Jay, she realizes that in his replies to her, he is much nicer than he usually is, and this helps her to realize that Bernard was right and that Jay is the mole that has been replaced as a host. We get a neat flashback to when he was switched, and this happened while he was on the stairwell approaching that outlier that was about to be killed by host William in the previous episode. In turn, Frankie and Jay begin to fight, and things aren't looking all that great for her. But before we come to the end of that narrative thread and get some interesting reveals surrounding what happens, we first have to recap the events that go on with Caleb now that we know he is being tested for fidelity. Turns out he's going through his own existential crisis, and Hell has him locked in a prison with multiple copies of himself. Towards the beginning of this episode, he's still with Hale, who's questioning him about the outliers who are causing problems. She believes that the outliers all started with Caleb because he was able to resist her years ago, and even now, he's refusing to give up his secrets. She tells him that he can have a painless death if he tells her, and she reveals that his host body is only made to last for a couple of days before it starts decomposing. Something that reminds us of when James Delos went mad after William left him alive in that Fidelity chamber back in season 2. And even this Fidelity chamber that Hell is keeping Caleb in looks strikingly round and familiar to that very facility in Westworld. But in wanting to find out the information she needs from Caleb, he's still resisting to tell her, and he frustrates her even more by saying that he knows that Frankie is alive and that she can't catch her. Hale reveals that she sent someone to take care of her, and that is of course the mole that was revealed to be a host version of Jay that we see in the other narrative thread. But in not getting what she really needs, and what we're sure to find out about, Hale leaves the facility, and Caleb is left to witness other chambers next to his, containing broken down versions of himself. Other host versions of Caleb that, like Delos, have ripped themselves apart or clawed away at their own faces. The one next to his cell with the damaged face tells him that dying is just the beginning, and he points on the glass towards a sand timer that Halores left in the room to signal how long he has left. Caleb opens it, and a small device pricks his finger, leading him to passing out. We then get a brief flashback with us revisiting the moment when he met his wife, who was a nurse at the hospital, and she treated him after his near-death injury. But he soon awakens from this memory and realizes that the drone host outside of his chamber is activating him for termination, with the whole room beginning to set alight with flames. He sees a marking on the vent in the floor that we understand came from another version of Caleb to help a version in the future, and our Caleb manages to lift it up and escape. Down below the chamber is a pit of ashes from previous Calebs that have been killed, but aside from that, there's also a door with a black handprint next to it, meaning that previous Calebs have gone further, and this is a path he needs to follow. On this path, one of the drone hosts nearly stops him, but he manages to kill it and escape through another door with another marked handprint. And before we come to the ending with Caleb and where this path leads him, we do have another small scene which involves Hale and Clementine discussing his escape. Hale complains that the humans have ruined everything, and she even questions Clementine by asking if they would ever affect her. Clementine replies in a way that doesn't alert her, saying that she doesn't get close to the outliers that cause the problems and prefers to just handle the sheep. This may be true for now, but like we saw with host William last week, the outliers are clearly becoming a big worry for Halores, and she doesn't want the same thing happening to even more hosts like Clementine if they come in contact. And that idea of hosts changing and essentially becoming aware to the darkness of the world Dolores wants them to evolve in is something that is addressed head-on in the ending to this week's episode. After Caleb finds another previous version of himself that is used by him to prevent a fatal fall out of a vent, he manages to escape to the roof of the building, where he aims to record a message for grown-up Frankie and send it out using the satellite, knowing that she could still be out there. In that scene, he calls her Cookie, which is why the Resistance call her C, and on the recording he says, "You're going to win. You're going to do what I couldn't, because you are strong, so much stronger than me. This world she made is a lie. It's not real. But what you have is real. I'm sorry that I failed, that I haven't been there for you, and now it has to be you. But you can do this. You're my warrior. I love you." So while this version of Caleb is starting to break down and reach his end, he's managed to apologise to his daughter for leaving with Maeve, yet fuel her to fight on and achieve what he couldn't. And that is to save the world. And this message that he broadcasts is sent out to the radio in the vehicle that Frankie has tuned in, with her hearing enough of his speech before Jay can destroy it. With that distraction, she also gets to a gun at the end of the vehicle in time and shoots Jay, causing another distraction that involves Maeve delivering a final blow. So yes, Maeve was already woken by Frankie, who had presumably planted her new memory pearl back inside her. They both have a brief discussion towards the end about Caleb and where they go from here, with Maeve telling her that it's time to finish what her and Caleb tried to do so many years ago. And when we then return to the top of that building with Caleb where he sent the message from, we see that Hale has now caught up. She tells him that she let him escape so that she could give him a bit of hope and to inspire him to do what the other Calebs couldn't. And we of course think that this is achieving fidelity in a host body. But it's in this moment that Hale thinks that he's wasted it all on an apology that his daughter would never hear. She never thought that his daughter would hear this message, or she doesn't know anything about her constant use of radios since she was a child. And while she did receive this message, Caleb tells Hale that it doesn't matter if she didn't hear it, because Hale will still lose, and the outliers that she's worried about didn't actually infect the hosts. In a striking reveal that follows, he tells Dolores that the reason the hosts kill themselves after coming in contact with the outliers is because they would rather die than live in a world that she's built. They are trying to get away from her, and in their moment of contact, they make a choice to disobey her system. And with that reply, Dolores angrily snaps his neck and ends up destroying all the other versions of Caleb in the Fidelity chambers we saw before. The clues that previous versions of him left are removed from the chambers too by drone hosts, and we end the episode on the construction of a new Caleb, which is apparently the 279th version of him. Dolores sits down in the Fidelity testing room we saw back in episode 4, with this new version of Caleb positioned in front of her, and she orders him to wake up in a great final scene that plays out to a new version of the Westworld theme music. Something to keep in mind with this ending is that the number 279 is a sign that things which have not worked out before will end, and it's an angel number that deals with moving on to another chapter. And I think this could signal that the new version of Caleb at the end of this episode is the one that is truly going to achieve fidelity and become the first successful test carried out. And if that is the case, then we could potentially see the same thing happen for William once we reach the events of that season 2 post-credit scene. That's just my guess on why they showed us this new version of Caleb being built at the end, and if the meaning of that number connects to this very idea, then we might see that happen. But I guess we'll soon see what comes of this in the episodes to come. What's clear is that the war for the future has been set in motion, and we're going to be seeing some dramatic events take place in the last 2 episodes. So what are my overall thoughts on episode 6? Well, for me, this was by far the best episode of Westworld since season 1 and 2. It was the perfect sequel episode to Riddle of the Sphinx, giving us another classic performance from a test subject. In season 2's episode, we saw Peter Mullen deliver iconic mannerisms as he was rebuilt over and over, with William's character aiming at achieving fidelity. He couldn't, but after this episode, we're back on the path to seeing that fully realised. Like I said in my predictions video the other day, eventually we will get to a point where William's fidelity test will become the reality. And in this episode, Aaron Paul delivers a similar all-time performance for the show, alongside director Andrew Seclair, who has merged two plot threads together, one with Caleb and one with his daughter, in all the most fascinating of ways. It's also great to see a filmmaker like Andrew lead such a great episode, because he's been responsible for some of the best episodes of this show with his timeless editing. Whether it be his editing on season 2's Riddle of the Sphinx, the season 1 finale, The Bicameral Mind, or episode 7 of that first season where Bernard is revealed to us as a host. It came full circle having him helm this episode, and what made it so great was the realization of a great script with ideas that we've been wondering about for many seasons. Fidelity, self-questioning, and the true physical landscapes of the worlds on display. It further had all the mystery, twists, action, and emotion that a great Westworld episode usually has. If episode 4 was the signal that Westworld has returned in a big way, then this episode was the nail in that idea. It sets up the endgame of this season, yet delivered on the core motivations for each of these characters. This week's episode was about them questioning their very selves, and it's exactly the question that makes Westworld so investing once it's done right. But that was my spoiler review and explained analysis for Westworld Season 4 Episode 6. I'm giving it a rating of 9.5 out of 10. I will be doing a trailer breakdown, predictions, and theories video for episode 7 in the next few days, so keep a lookout for that and stay tuned to my channel each week for breakdowns on every episode of season 4. But to those who have already seen the episode, what are your thoughts on all the events that went down, and what do you think will happen in episode 7? Let me know down below in the comment section. For more videos on every episode of Westworld Season 4, then subscribe to the channel and turn on your notifications. Also, if you enjoyed this video, remember to leave a like rating and follow me on social media via the links in the description. But anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed it. I've been Cortex, and as always, make some noise.